Hello, I'm Dr. Chelsie Counsell, and I'll be leading the workshop today on creative approaches to solving the climate crisis. The way this workshop's going to run is I'll do a brief introduction to the thoughts behind the workshop, and then we'll have a few activities where I'll encourage you to pause the video and complete an activity either by yourself or with a group of people if you're lucky enough to be with a group of people right now. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. As coral reef enthusiasts and scientists, I know that we're all intimately familiar with the high cost of not addressing the climate crisis. Many of us have seen our favorite reefs bleach. We've seen the transition to lower coral cover, fewer fish. We've noticed that reefs that were once vibrant ecosystems have become crumbly and desolate. The climate crisis is not new. The fact that CO2 emissions on a global scale are dramatically altering the climate and affecting ecosystems, sometimes changing them beyond recognition. We've known about this. We've known about the role of CO2 emissions. It's been shared by climate scientists for decades. This figure is from NASA's website, based on ice core and atmospheric data, showing that the current CO2 levels are at a level that we haven't seen on this planet for millennia. Of course, the loss of coral reefs is just one of the effects of increased CO2 emissions. Shrinking ice sheets, sea level rise, increases in extreme events, the ongoing and predicted changes are terrifying. It can be all too easy, given the vast scale of the climate crisis, to find ourselves in a place of despair, to imagine others will solve the problem, to tell ourselves that voting for the right political candidates is enough, or that our continuing research is enough to have done our part. Unfortunately, we all have to do everything we can. And one of the greatest threats to our planet right now is the belief that someone else is going to save it. Our actions matter, and we need to act with intent for the future that we want to live in. Ruth Gates, the former director of HIMB and a really incredible coral reef scientist and person, she knew we had already lost 50% of the world's coral reefs. And when people would ask her what we could do to help save the reefs, she would encourage us to pick something and do it. As people who study, manage, care deeply about coral reefs, we all have the opportunity to lead by example through redesigning our structure of our business and personal lives and developing creative ways to achieve our personal and professional goals that dramatically reduce our carbon emissions. We can take an active role in shaping the future we want. I know actions that we take on our own can sometimes feel really small, but when we take these actions and we're a role model, we have a ripple effect. Some of the actions that I've been taking are having a plant-based diet, commuting by bicycle, buying local sustainably made products, and making a commitment to fly less for personal and professional activities. Those actions by a single person are still relatively small, but I talk to my family and friends about taking these actions. They see me taking these actions. So do my colleagues. They see me bike to work. They hear me talking about why I'm eating a vegetarian diet. Hopefully not too much. They still have lunch with me. And the general public sees what we're doing and hears our message. Our actions speak louder than words. And if all of us, all of our coral reef enthusiasts and scientist friends, if all of us were willing to be a drop in the bucket, I think we would have a tsunami of unprecedented social change, which is exactly what we need to combat the climate crisis. The reality is that global emissions need to be cut by 7.6% every year to keep global warming from surpassing 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That's the threshold associated with the most dangerous climate threats. The current global lockdown and economic slump as a side effect of the pandemic may actually reduce emissions by close to 7% this year. But we will need to do that again in the next year and again in the following year. Every year we need to cut by 7.6% at a minimum. In order to do that, we need to dream big about the future that we want to see, and we need to come up with clear actions to get to the future that we want. So in this workshop, I want to encourage you all to rethink paradigm. And as an example, I'm going to talk a little bit about Global Coral Reef Week. In order to come up, where did Global Coral Reef Week come from? Well, it came from myself and Fran and Judy rethinking the paradigm of a research conference. As part of that process, I think the first step is to step back and ask, what are the goals of the activity? And then to allow yourself to creatively think about a way to achieve the goals without burning excessive amounts of fossil fuels. And so this list isn't exhaustive, but when we started talking about what the goals of research conferences are, we came up with things like sharing research, networking, innovative ideas formed when you have people together thinking about coral reefs. And then we started to think about the traditional approach to a research conference. Participants tend to travel to a single meeting location. They spend a few days or a week at the conference, and the conference has a variety of different workshops, oral talks, posters, plenary talks, coffee breaks, a lot of great content. In some of the larger conferences, that can lead to overlapping content, but that's sort of this traditional model. And so now that we've got ourselves thinking, okay, what are the goals and how do we currently achieve them? I think it's worth pausing to think, what are the pros and the cons of the traditional approach that we've been using? For the conference model, and again, these lists aren't exclusive, but some of the pros that we've thought about are things like an opportunity to share your research with the broad audience that's attended the conference, high potential for networking with strangers. At a traditional conference, when you've got hundreds or thousands of scientists in the same location, it's easy to bump into somebody, whether you're on your way to the coffee break or lunch or what have you. And I think that because of that ease of running into people and having those person conversations, meetings and workshops, innovative ideas can and do emerge from the traditional conference model. I think there's some real cons to the traditional conference model. The financial cost of attending limits the audience. And this is particularly true for early career scientists and for scientists from developing nations. Also, the CO2 cost of travel for the conference participants is a real con to the traditional conference model. Flying is one of the fastest ways to burn carbon as an individual, but driving a single passenger vehicle for long distance is also a high carbon cost. So getting hundreds of thousands of people to one location has a real travel cost. There's true that having all that great content and having overlap of content can lead to missed content. So I've certainly been at conferences where I have tried to rush from one session to another or from one workshop to another and ultimately ended up missing some of the content that I had been really excited about or having to prioritize and choose between content. Another thing that happens at traditional conferences is you will sometimes see groups of people who already know each other and work together, kind of wandering around the conference together. So sometimes instead of networking with new people, there's a bit of a tendency to network with people you already know. All right, so now we've thought through the traditional approach to a research conference. The next step we took was to look back at those goals and to allow ourselves to be creative in designing a new approach. And we're building off of other ideas here. So there's Ken Hiltner at UC Santa Barbara has worked hard on the nearly carbon neutral model for conferences. And we've built off of his work and other virtual conferences to think of what we wanted for Global Coral Reef Week. One thing that was important to us was having a digital repository of contributed talks. We also wanted to use existing technology to connect participants globally. We wanted to have live stream content and have ways to encourage active participation. And before we had the pandemic shifting our approach, we did want to establish multiple location hubs such that participants could travel by bike, bus, carpooling, or train, but not need to travel long distances to still have an opportunity to have in-person networking, but at a smaller spatial scale. So you're getting a blend of global international content and sharing of research with in-person networking. That was our goal to redesigning the conference paradigm. So as we think about creative solutions to the climate crisis, I think it's really important that we don't let ourselves get blinded by what we think we know or the way that things have always been. Our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, we don't have to go that far back to remember that the world is always changing. It's going to continue changing. But we can guide this change. We can think about what's important to us and how we can structure those things to continue in a carbon-free, carbon-neutral world. I think things to think about changing and who we want to be. You can think about our daily transportation, travel for research and pleasure, our utilities in the household as well as the workplace, societal diets and our personal diet choices, and things like norms on manufacturing and construction, which can be really high emitters of carbon. Okay, so let's take a break. Let's take a break and go into an activity. So I recommend that you take about 5 to 20 minutes and run through these steps. Pick a component of your professional or personal life and think about the key goals. Write them out. Why do you do this activity? Then briefly sketch out the traditional approach that you followed. What are the pros? What are the cons of that approach? And allow yourself to creatively brainstorm how you could meet the goals in a carbon neutral future. Allow yourself to be creative. If carbon neutral feels impossible, allow yourself to do low carbon. But if you're feeling overly creative and open-minded, maybe there's a way you can meet your goals that actually sequesters CO2. Okay, I'm going to just kind of hesitate. Go ahead and pause the video and enjoy this activity. Great. I hope that activity went well for you. The next steps, in order to create the future we want, we need a vision and we need concrete ideas about how to get from here to there. Over the long term, the future is decided by optimists. We can't ignore the problems. We have to be able to imagine improving our capacity to solve problems. If one solution isn't working, we need to be able to think what will. In order to transform the world, we need to have a stubborn, relentless optimism. Things will continue to not work the way we had hoped, and we will continue to need to come up with new ideas. As an example, with Global Coral Reef Week, we acknowledge that there are some weaknesses to the approach that we have been taking for this year. It's challenging to work across international time zones. We also know that given the virtual nature of this conference, there are some limitations on networking. And that makes it challenging to create an environment where people can come up with innovative ideas. We also note that there's some carbon emission cost of storing and streaming digital content, though previous work, including that by Ken Hiltner, has shown that's substantially less than the traditional conference carbon emissions, but still not completely carbon neutral. So there's these things that we're thinking about. As we think about the weaknesses, I think it's also important to acknowledge the additional benefits. Our main goal was to decrease carbon emissions, but in doing so, the approach that we've taken to this conference has a lot of additional benefits. I think there's high accessibility for international colleagues, early career scientists, and the public. The recorded digital content for this conference is on a YouTube channel. And so anyone with the link can enjoy the video, which means it can be shared with school teachers, politicians, colleagues, family, friends. The accessibility of science is huge. We've also increased the capacity for contributed content without increasing the cost of the conference. So we can host as many videos as we want. We just add them all to the playlist and they're there. So we don't need to worry about how many conference rooms we can pay for and how many talks we can host. Another great addition is that we have increased ability for participants to watch the content on the timeline that works for them. There is no missed content. You can always go back and watch a video, even if it was a live stream part of this conference, you can watch it at a later time that works for you. Given the digital content, I think there's actually increased opportunities for people to comment and question the different contributed research. Because you can comment on the YouTube video or reach out to the author if they've provided contact information, we're not limited to a 1 to 3 minute session after each talk. Instead, we have as long as you would like. We have 2 weeks that the videos are live, but there's extended time to talk about the research. This tangible product, the recorded talk that you have, if you've contributed to this conference, I think is a huge benefit. You could use it to market yourself for jobs, to share with family, friends, to share with public school systems. There's a lot of potential for this work to go beyond the conference. Another benefit is the decreased disruption to your work and personal life activities. So for some of us who might have field work going on or young families at home, having a virtual conference allows you to continue being active in those parts of your life and not to need to step away for 2 days or a week as you might have for a traditional conference. But moving forward, we do want to think about ways to improve for the next Global Coral Reef Week. What insights from participants on what worked well and what didn't? How can we reach out to the different platforms that we're using for the digital repository, for live streaming content? And how can we ask them to improve the technology such that we can have a higher capacity to have innovative ideas and to have networking in a virtual conference? We want to build in new creative solutions to improve the conference experience. And as good scientists, use our data, use new ideas, and keep innovating. Will this Global Coral Reef Week be the best virtual conference you go to, despite being one of the co-organizers? I hope not. I hope this is just part of the beginning for redesigning our approach to conferences. I hope it gets people to start thinking about what worked and what didn't, and to share their creative ideas for improvements. But I hope that this is the start of getting us to a place where non-traditional conferences could be so well designed that the idea of flying thousands of scientists to one place for a week of sharing science sounds completely crazy, that the new approach is the preferred approach. So I'd like you to take another break for another activity. I recommend 5 to 10 minutes, but whatever works for you. And think about what are the additional benefits of the new approach you were thinking about for a personal or professional component of your life? And what are the potential new weaknesses? And how could you address those weaknesses? So I'm again going to hesitate, pause the video, and go ahead and encourage you to run this activity. Great. Hopefully that was long enough for you to pause and then restart. The final thing I want to talk about is ways to strengthen your earth echo. This picture is me, and I'm saying a quick hi to a friend while on a 5-mile bike commute to a beach barbecue with my 2 dogs. I love biking as a method to decrease the carbon impact of my daily travel. And I know that me biking is not going to solve climate change on its own, but I also know that people see me biking, whether it's strangers passing me on the street, whether it's my friends or colleagues when I arrive at work or the grocery store, or when I arrive at the beach barbecue. And that when some of these people see me biking, they might think about themselves biking more as a way to get around. To help strengthen this earth echo, I regularly post photos of myself biking. I talk about biking to my family, friends, and colleagues. I've helped other people purchase bikes that might work well for them. I've even taught free classes to community members about ways to bike safely and confidently. I've worked with a local nonprofit to encourage biking. I've attended town hall meetings, and I've reached out to local politicians to ask them to help us get safer streets where people feel more comfortable biking and therefore are empowered to bike more often. We cannot take actions that we take in a vacuum. We certainly can't do everything alone. We need to talk to the people in our social circle about the actions we're taking and have a critical look at how society and towns that we live in operate. Are there subsidies, habits, or hurdles that make it difficult for individuals to lower their carbon emissions? If so, we need to talk about them with our social network, and we need to get in touch with the people who have the power to make the changes. Call the local government, ask for more bike lanes, right? When I realized that my place of work didn't have the best bike rack, I found one that was being donated, and I brought it to work such that there would be a better way for myself and anyone else who wanted to bike to work to safely secure their bike. We need to be open-minded and reaching out to others to make our action have a louder echo. For the final activity, I'm going to ask that you sketch out the ripple effect of your actions. How will you share your action with others? How can you empower others to take similar action? And who has the power to make this action easier for more people to take? How can you reach out to them? I think this one should just take maybe 5 minutes, but again, pause the video and take the time that you need. Great. Hopefully you're ready. As a little wrap up to this workshop, I want to just remind us what we all know. The economics and the science on the climate crisis are clear. If we as a society maintain our current course, it will result in ecosystem and financial collapse. The climate crisis is a social problem. It's a willpower problem. And as a society, we have already ignored it for over 100 years. While it's a global problem, the actions that are taken locally matter. And at this point, we need all hands on deck. We need everyone to do everything that they can to reduce their CO2 emissions and their community's reliance on burning fossil fuels. As part of this, we need to be welcoming of innovation and creative ideas as we rethink paradigms. We need to be creative and be part of redesigning what has become business as usual in our professional lives as coral reef enthusiasts and scientists, and in our personal lives. We need to take action, talk to other people, encourage them to take action. In Greta's words, the rules have to be changed. Everything needs to change, and it has to start today. I want to thank you for joining me for this workshop. I hope it was productive for you, and I've put my contact information on this final slide, so please do feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to talk further or have any other questions or comments. Thanks again.